Good evening from the European Parliament. Now, ahead of the EU elections, we sat down with 5 of the lead candidates vying for the job of European Commission President.
And over the last few weeks, they've been joining us here in Brussels, answering questions from the studio audience and from you at home. Here are some of the highlights.
I think we should end the subsidies to plane travel, because right now we're giving airlines a tax break, whereas we tax heavily trains, for example. So on a train ticket you will have to pay a VAT. On a plane ticket you don't have to pay that. Airlines don't pay taxes on the kerosene, so it gives this unfair competition to planes. So we should stop, not just in flying, but overall we should stop subsidies that go to things that harm our planet. Right now, we're spending 55 billion euros a year subsidizing fossil fuel technology, and we shouldn't do that. We should put that money into climate-friendly technology. The climate issue is totally connected to the social issue. It's the poorer people who suffer most from climate changes, and it's the poorer people who actually have much less CO2 emissions than richer people. Gender equality is indeed one thing where we have to put a lot in. I mean, it was already in the Rome Treaty that the European Union said we want to increase gender equality. And, well, I would say we haven't arrived there yet. I mean, if we look at just this House, where in this current Parliament, the female quota is not much more than 30%. But also we want to have a law on pay transparency to make it transparent how much a company pays to men and women, so that you would detect inequality, because it's quite amazing, right, that we still don't know how much companies are paying. So a lot of inequalities are detected. First of all, we need to make sure that we do everything possible so that people don't have to flee. And sure, there's not every problem can be solved by the European Union tomorrow, like the war in Syria, probably not. But member states are still exporting weapons to countries like Saudi Arabia in conflict areas. Saudi Arabia is bombing Yemen. That's not the only conflict area we're sending weapons to. This should stop. We should have a trade policy that doesn't make poor people even poorer, an agriculture policy that doesn't deprive people of their livelihoods, a fishery policy that doesn't do the same. But then we should also make sure that no one is drowning anymore in the Mediterranean, because I cannot accept that in 2019 we're living in a European Union where people are drowning in the Mediterranean. We know where they are, we know where they're drowning, and we're not helping at all. Look, the thing is, if someone is in need, you cannot say you're the 1,001st person, no, we're not taking you. On refugees, you cannot put a limit. On migrants, you can. Migration is a whole different subject. Refugees are people in need, and you cannot keep them out. It's international law, European law, it's humanity that makes sure that people have to be protected. But again, migration, totally different story. So that's labor migration, for example. Of course, the state can say we take this many, that many, this skill, that skill, and not next year. That's perfectly fine.
Europe has promised democracy, rule of law, and civil liberties to all its citizens. But those very big successes, they are under threat. And we need to fight for them again every single day. Because inside Europe, today, judges are being dismissed, corruption is being legalized, newspapers are closed, universities harassed, and civil society treated as criminals. We have responsibilities. You, as President of the Commission, we all, as members of the European Parliament, but all Europeans, from north to south, from east to west. Because if Europe loses on democracy, then it will lose itself.
We should make sure that we're doing trade agreements only with countries that have signed the Paris Agreement, and the US are going out of that, and that is a problem. We should say, wait, for us those things are interlinked. Trade should not contradict our climate targets, and we are very much in favor of international cooperation, bilateral cooperation, but it also needs to be on the basis of international agreements and multilateral agreements.
I think it's time we put an end to austerity politics. I think we've already changed the way we do a lot of our work. We've concentrated on the big things better than before. But, you know, for us to do what we want to do, we need to be stronger than we were in the last election. We need to create a progressive alliance. We need to make sure we have a progressive majority in the European Parliament. It's a lot of work. It's not easy, but I think we can get there. And then we can do the things that are extremely urgent. Tax reform is one of them. We need to make sure that the biggest corporations who make a lot of profits in Europe actually start paying taxes, what they're not doing now. And for that, you need Europe. You can't do that individually by member states anymore. We also need to make sure that salaries go up in Europe. And we are the ones who came up with the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations and got them agreed. We are the ones who were able to get all the nations together on the Paris Agreement, on climate change. So we have a huge legacy and a huge responsibility to safeguard that system, even in the age of Trump. So we see, for instance, in our talks with Japan these days, also in our talks with China a couple of weeks ago, we see that there is a willingness across the world to follow the European path of multilateralism. But we also have a fight internally in the European Union. We have this temptation to withdraw behind national borders out of desperation or out of lack of perspective. We have to fight that tendency as well. We're not going to create a better society for our citizens by withdrawing behind borders. That is not going to help. Brexit, for me, is one of the most tragic things I've ever experienced in my political life. And if there is any chance that the British population would rethink this or come to a different conclusion, I honestly believe that changing your mind is a fundamental human right. So what if a majority of the Brits would change their mind and be able to express that in a referendum? And then Britain perhaps would stay in the European Union. That's my dream. Everyone in the European Union is sad about this. Nobody wants them to leave. They made that decision. It's a sovereign decision. We need to respect that. But I still hope they might have second thoughts. In the past, people in the middle classes felt self-assured and were happy to try and help people in more precarious situations to come up there and to improve themselves. And now people in the middle classes feel themselves threatened, and some of them have the tendency to then keep the weaker people in society away because they're afraid of being drawn into that. So I think we need some very active programs to do something about this. We, for instance, as Social Democrats, are strong proponents of a minimum wage in every single member state of the European Union. That would be about 60% of the median wage. Then already you create upward momentum and you create more possibility for people to improve themselves. What we need to do is to have a CO2 tax at the European level. That is the biggest change that will lead to producers understanding they need to change the way they produce. What we also need to do is to make sure that carbon trading goes up by lifting the price of that as well. What we introduced, for instance, in the plastics legislation is that producers are also made responsible for the waste they create. So if you can't reuse or recycle and it becomes waste, then the cost for the producers will increase. So that's how you make producers more responsible for the waste they create.
We need to find a new equilibrium between what could be better executed on a national level and what could be better executed on the European level. When it comes to, for instance, fighting global warming or climate change, I still believe that we've been doing pretty well. But I don't believe that for each and every case we should try to find a European solution. We are pretty much effective when it comes to economy, when it comes to a single market, when it comes to common commercial policy, when it comes to customs union. But I have always had, and I still have very serious doubts about our ability to create a full-blooded political union. It has its limits. In some cases and under some circumstances, we simply have to respect national positions of individual member states. I believe that partly, maybe paradoxically, it is too much of a European integration where some people or some segments of societies, some social groups, some age groups maybe have got a feeling that European Union is interfering into what they consider to be their traditions. We are not the same. Our societies are different. Some societies are more liberal, some of them are more conservative, and we should not try just to put them into one line. I would say that each and everyone, every person which wants to be granted asylum, permanent or temporary settlement, or even citizenship, has to obey the rules and has to respect the law. So I think that states and national governments and ministries simply have to insist on sticking with the rules and with the national legislation. I would stick with our current commitments, the Paris Climate Agreement. We've made certain commitments, we have to stick with them, but I have to be very straightforward and very open when it comes to that call from the Commission and from the Parliament asking for zero carbon economy until 2050. I believe that it's nice to say that, but it's pretty unrealistic to achieve that. I think that we should first fulfill our current commitments we have made already. And then, once we do that, we can maybe declare some new bold strategies and agendas and things like that. We have almost 40% of money spent for agriculture. We should change the system, how we pay subsidies from Common Agriculture Policy chapter. I would say that we should go away from a production-oriented support to organic farming, supporting small farms. It's an instrument, mostly political instrument for further integration. I think it should be made voluntary and not obligatory. And therefore, I am in favor of multi-currency union. There are also other implications of euro that are not so positive, and this is the fact that it is a political instrument of further integration. Because once you introduce euro, then probably you have to come with a harmonization of fiscal policy, tax policy, maybe social policies, and things like that. And again, I don't believe in European Union as a state or quasi-state entity. I believe in European Union as a free conglomerate of cooperating states. It was a mistake of the European Union that allowed one of its strongest and most successful members to leave. I believe that if David Cameron was offered at least something during those first negotiations, which he could have sold back home as a success or as a concession of the European Union, there might have been a different result of a referendum.
We think that it would be a good pattern for all European countries that we account minimum spends, how much one family needs or one person needs for the minimum costs of living. Minimum wage must be 20% over this minimum cost level, because it is unacceptable that we have working people who works 8 hours a day, 40 hours a week, and they cannot survive with their salaries.
But isn't the problem with that, just quickly on this, that irrespective of a minimum wage, because it'll be different, people will still, particularly in Eastern Europe, be attracted to come and live in Western Europe, where wages are so much higher. And emigration, people leaving places like Poland and Romania and Hungary, is very high because of that inequality. What you're proposing won't stop that.
Yes, it will, because it will prevent that competition between countries will not take a form of social dumping, because everybody could live with their wages on the place when they work and live. Our house is falling apart, and it is definitely true. So we have to take urgent action about it. It is simply not possible in this system we have, in neoliberal capitalism, because it is following just unlimited growth and competition and no values about people and our planet. I would like to introduce the program where we will have Green New Deal for Europe, and we will create a lot of green jobs and green infrastructure and public transport. Europe fails on humanity because thousands and thousands of people are finishing their life in ocean, and we are just building the walls and buying more weapons.
So what would you do about the migrants' crisis?
First, we have to solve the problem at the very origin. And first, we have to stop the wars, because
but the ones who are already here.
The ones who are already here, we have to work with them, to give them the lessons, language lessons, and to integrate them as soon as it is possible. History is repeating itself, and we have to learn something from the history, or we will have to face it again. In 30s of previous century, it was the same. First economic crisis and then Second World War, because people are so frustrated, so angry, because they cannot survive the month. On the other hand, you have extremely rich people. While during the economic crisis we were tightening our belts, the number of billionaires doubled. So the far right harvests success from those who have a feeling that neoliberal globalization is leaving them behind.
This crisis is mainly a crisis because of a lack of European policies. So nationalists and populists are pointing the finger to Europe, but it's not Europe that is the source of this crisis. It's because of a lack of European policies. There is no European border and coast guard, first point. There is no European asylum system, because the existing Dublin system is mainly the opposite of a European system. There is thirdly not a European economic migration system, giving the possibility for people to come in a legal way to Europe. And I think that my first priority would be to tackle all these tragedies in the Mediterranean by establishing these three building blocks. The United States of Europe is a way to organize a common action on the European level by recognizing, by guaranteeing the autonomy of the member states. I don't want a superstate. I'm against the European superstate. I don't want a system where everything is decided by Brussels here next door in the European Commission. People are not against the European dream. People are not against the European project. People are against the way we translate this European project into the European Union of today. The solution for the challenges that we are facing today is not to go back to nationalist and populist rhetoric of the 20th century. What we need to do is to reform the European Union. That is, for example, to establish a European Commission that is replaced by a European government, a small European government, not a big European Commission. That is, for example, to replace the waste of money we have in Europe on military by a European army. That is to replace the bad policies of the member states on migration with the European border and coast guard. That is our solution. We want to go from a defensive approach of climate change to a more offensive approach of climate change. And that means two things. The first is to put climate change as a condition to make deals with Europe. Our strength is an enormous common market of 400, 500 million of consumers and people. And in negotiations with China, with America, we have to use that trade. And the second thing to do, in my opinion, is to establish, to create what I call European champions on the transformation of our economy into a more ecological economy. They have a problem to leave. But they are already struggling 2 years to find a position to leave. I follow it from day one, and I can tell you, I have never seen a situation in a country, in a parliament, where they're always voting against something and never in favor of something. They're voting against a no deal, they're voting against the deal, they're voting against the customs union, they're voting against the single market, but never they have told us what they want. The fact that in Europe we are saying, look, Britain can maybe decide to go out of the European Union, but we will never allow the Brexiteers to kill the European Union, to end the European Union, what is in fact the case. Some Brexiteers are openly saying, the only thing what we want is the end of the European Union. We will never let it happen. They can make their choice about in or out, but we will never allow that they kill the European Union.
Manfred Weber, European People's Party candidate for presidency of the European Commission, was not available to join Raw Questions. Our journalist Nicoletta Drucker met him in Athens, where he's kicked off his campaign.
Nobody should any more be forced to leave his home region only to economic reasons, because we have to guarantee that all Europeans have equal living conditions all over Europe. That is a question for Greece, but also for Ireland, where we also had a program country, but also for the eastern countries in the European Union. So it's a question for a lot of Europeans to guarantee these principles. And I want to deliver on this. That means a clear commitment to the European funds, so the question of solidarity. I see a lack of investments at the moment, here in Greece, but all over Europe. So private and public investment in the infrastructure to give Europe a next boost for our economic development. And the second element for me is we need trade. So Europe is a trading continent. We have a lot of trade relationships. And when Donald Trump is building up walls, not only for migrants, but also for trade partners, I'm traveling since beginning of this year around Europe. And I met thousands of people, direct talks. And I must tell you that not a lot of people really believes that Turkey should become member of the European Union. A lot of people think that we need a general discussion where are the borders of Europe? Where is the end of Europe? What do we see as European Union? What is the final composition of the European Union? We have to work in the next 5 years on a very general discussion. What is Europe all about? Where are the final borders of Europe? And don't get me wrong, on Turkey, I believe in strong cooperation, like we did it with the migration treaty between Turkey and the European Union. We have to even enlarge this with stronger ties on the economic fields or on the question of exchange of students or cultural background. We want to have a strong and solid, good relationship between Turkey and the European Union, but I think we should be honest, that includes that Turkey cannot become a member of the European Union.
And that's it for tonight. Thanks lots for watching.
And join us again next time and stay tuned to Euronews for special EU election coverage. Good night.